Ready? 1, 2, 3. Welcome back, AP! Here we are. We are fairy and delightful. Happy Saturday. We're here to talk about the restoration after Cromwell. It's going to be a good time. Apparently, the Old English government was restored in 1660, and Charles II just barreled on in, and it was a real good time. He's considered the Merry Monarch. Is that correct? Let's see. Hit the next button. It says the ghost behind me. So yeah, he was a big party animal, and everybody really liked him. He's the Merry Monarch. And here's a little bit of his backstory. You can read it to yourselves silently.
Hi, girls.
He was a secret Catholic?
He was a secret Catholic, actually.
Is there such a thing?
Yeah, because as the girls know, Catholicism was heavily disliked in England following the separation of the Anglican Church from the Catholic faith when Henry VIII created the Anglican faith. Became very anti-Catholic.
Oh, interesting. Did you put a picture of Slash on here?
What's Slash?
From Guns N' Roses?
No. You're thinking, no, that's Charles II. That's him.
Isn't this a picture of the guitar player?
That is not a guitar player from Guns N' Roses. I will put a picture of Slash up there really quick.
I think everyone needs to see that. This guy looks exactly like a big rock and roller, which is how good of a time this lesson's going to be.
There you go. Thank you.
Finger guns all around.
Thank you, sweetheart. All right, so I figured on a Saturday after days and days and days of not having class, it'd probably be nice for somebody else to introduce one of these flips for once, right? And I'm sure y'all are like, where'd she go? Could she talk about it? Well, she doesn't know a ton of stuff about the English monarchy and the Restoration period, right? So she already brought this up, though. What we're getting into now is we're discussing the Restoration period of the Stuarts under or following the Commonwealth period in England, right? So life under Cromwell was absolute garbage, right? Like nobody wanted to be under Cromwell. Nobody liked it. Christmas was banned. The Navigation Acts forced on the colonists. The colonists didn't like him, right? The bars were closed. Singing in public, sweetheart, was not allowed. You had to wear black and white. You couldn't, stay out past certain times of the day. You had to go to church every Sunday, and if you didn't go, you could be fined. Nobody liked life under Cromwell, right? And some of you probably made the good assessment already, where you're like, wait a minute, Mr. Terry. So it sounds like the English Puritans bet on Oliver Cromwell, and this bet went kind of sour, because he sounds a lot like a king, right? Yeah, exactly, right? So when the Rump Parliament failed, and he disbanded it, and he created the Protectorate, Oliver Cromwell basically was the next monarch, right? Even a little bit of worse, right? He just had a new title, and he called himself the Lord Protector, right? So if we actually take 2 seconds to look at these two seals, so really, really quickly so you understand, the English monarchy always has a seal, right? Every single time a new monarch is elected, they would have a seal. And this is the seal of Charles I, the king who's going to be executed, right, by Oliver Cromwell due to the English Civil War and him losing it. So, when he loses the Second English War, Charles I is going to be executed, and this is the seal that will be retired. And as you can tell, it's got Charles fully in armor, on a horse, astride, with a greyhound or a hound dog running underneath him, right? Showing his royal valor. That's Charles' seal. And then this is the seal of Oliver Cromwell when he becomes Lord Protector. Do we see much of a difference? I know these spot the difference games are getting pretty tough these days, but as you can tell, there's barely any difference between what Oliver Cromwell became when he was Lord Protector versus the ideas of Charles I. So what's going to end up happening to this is the Parliament and the people of England are all going to immediately start looking around at each other and be like, wait a minute, this is basically like we have a king all over again, except we don't get to party, we don't get to do anything, we don't get to have Christmas, we don't get to have Halloween, we don't get to drink, we don't get to do any, I'm not saying, we don't get to do anything. We can't do anything that one would consider fun, right? So they decided we should just get rid of this whole Commonwealth thing, right? And right when Oliver Cromwell dies, they reinstate the monarchy, right? Hence the Restoration period. And Charles II comes in, and he is known as the Merry Monarch, right? Due to the fact that he had a huge court, right? Massive parties all the time, and he was very, very, some people believe he was kind of hedonistic, all right? We'll talk about what that means in class. But a lot of people also call him the king that brought back partying, right? So he was very popular, very, 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 very popular. One of the most beloved kings in all of English history, right? Charles II has a very intense backstory, though, right? How did he go from being this guy who was in exile, spent most of his youth in exile with his mom, to then becoming the king of England all over again, right? So we do have to talk about his backstory just a little bit. So the biggest thing is, though, whoa, come on back. The biggest thing is, though, is that he did spend most of that time in exile with his mother, right? So once Charles I goes to war with the Parliament, and the Cavaliers and the Roundheads square off against each other in two, not one, but two English civil wars, and Charles I eventually loses the second, and then also loses his head, and that gets separated from his shoulders, and Oliver Cromwell takes over. From the beginning of that first English Civil War, Henrietta, okay, his mother, Charles II's mother, takes him into exile in France, right? They go into France to avoid violence and to also avoid possibly being killed, right? And then they also start moving around a little bit, and then Charles II ends up eventually going to the Netherlands. Now, during this time period, though, he becomes very addicted to two things, right? As he's growing and becoming a young man, he actually grows very addicted to two things: women and tennis, right? So he is a huge fan of royal tennis, loves to play tennis, and then also loves to philander is the word that we'll use here. Had a lot of different mistresses. Some were actresses, and some were singers, and some were just royal, like daughters of royal courtsmen, right? So he was very, very into women, though. Now, he was brought back to the British Isles originally as the king of the Scots, right? Right after his father is executed. The Scottish are like, wait a second, we are no longer a part of England anymore because the crown is now separate again, right? Now that our king is dead, now that Charles I, who was the king of the Scots and also the king of the English, is dead, that means that we're a separate country again. So the Scottish bring Charles back to Scotland, and they smuggle him in 1 week after his father's execution. He's in his 20s by this point. And they proclaim him the Scottish king, right? They tell him he has to sign a document. He signs it, and he's not really a fan of this entire thing. He absolutely hates being the Scottish king and just the Scottish king for a time period because he has to go to like 6 hours of mass every Sunday. They're all Presbyterian, and he's not really a Presbyterian because what is he? He's a secret Catholic, right? So, like, secretly, deep down, he believed that he was a Catholic, right? He actually, because his mother was a Catholic, and he spent most of his life and his developmental years in exile with his mother in France, right? So he himself was a Catholic as well. So this whole Scottish Presbyterian king thing is really emotionally tearing him apart, right? So he then eventually, though, fights the Third English Civil War against Cromwell to try and take the throne back, which is a massive failure. So Oliver Cromwell may have been awful. No one liked him. He banned everything fun and basically we all hate his guts. But he had a good army, right? He had a very large army, he had a very solid army, a very stand-up army that could easily prevent somebody like the Scots under Charles II from retaking the throne, right? So who is calling? Sorry about that. We were having some technical difficulties there for a little bit. But we left off talking about how Charles II is going to become king of the Scots, right? And he's going to be brought in to try and help efficiently try to take back the English monarchy. Unfortunately, this is going to massively fail due to the large size of Cromwell's army, right? Now, again, though, he's a secret Catholic, right? Actually began to convert when he was a young man. And also, actually, during the Third English Civil War, really heavily converted over to Catholicism. And a lot of this is because he was actually on the run, right? In the Third English Civil War, he was on the run from Oliver Cromwell's military forces, and he was being hidden throughout these areas of Wales and southern England and areas, the Welsh country, right? So a lot of Welsh Catholics and a lot of former Catholics and still at-home Catholics, as we know, the Catholics didn't really go anywhere in England. They were just kind of forced into hiding. When these Catholics, these secret at-home Catholics, they would actually have these little places in their homes known as priest holes, right? Priest holes were these dug-in little trap doors inside of houses where they would literally hide Catholic priests in them and smuggle them through the different parts of the country so they could avoid persecution. Now, interestingly enough, while Charles at one point during the Third English Civil War was avoiding Oliver Cromwell's armies after losing several major battles, he was running and hiding in these different houses with these different priest holes, and he was inside of one of them. They shoved him down in there. and there was a Catholic priest down there, right? And they began to talk to one another, and it was in this moment that he became very, very good friends with this priest. And this priest became one of his loyal confidants, but secretly. Because remember, he couldn't come out and outright be a Catholic, right? But following the death of Cromwell, not the victory in the Third English Civil War, which he never actually achieved, that's when he's going to be brought back as king by popular demand. And to just show you how much everybody wanted him back, let's take a look at a body part that will be added to our list in class, Cromwell's head, right? So Oliver Cromwell was so disliked after the Restoration period, literally in 1685, Oliver Cromwell's head was dug up and put on a stick, and they ran through England with it, right? So as like a weird torch, you might say, and they actually ran around through England with it, and this is almost 20 years after Charles II was actually brought in. So that is how much everyone couldn't stand Cromwell. So he was brought back by popular demand. Now, the son of Cromwell did try to take over momentarily, but it was a massive failure, and his name was Richard Cromwell, right? But the Merry Monarch himself is going to be brought back, right? The guy who's addicted to women and tennis, the guy who tried to fight as the King of the Scots, but they're going to see a reunion of the crowns under Charles II, and he is going to be brought back by the Parliament, and everyone's going to be like, please, Charles, come back, we're begging you. And the problem is that you would think that things would now be able to be smooth, right? That things would be easy, but Charles's reign early on, since he was brought back in 1660, was fraught with challenges, right? Charles really struggled with a lot of things. One, the 1665 outbreak of the plague in London killed 7,000 people per week, right? So one of the biggest plague outbreaks that occurred since the Middle Ages broke out in London and killed over 7,000 people per week. And I believe killed close to 700,000 people by the time it was fully over. Plague of London. Death toll. Deaths. There we go. Let's see. Oh, 75,000. 75,000 people died in London due to this plague outbreak, right? And it was very, very bad because the houses were so small, they were so crammed and packed together. There were no sanitation systems, and a lot of people are going to begin to move away and live in the rural areas. Even Charles himself actually moved the entire royal seat to the countryside of England, and the Parliament actually met in the country outside of London while this was happening. And a very famous figure that's going to come out of this, just a side note, this is just a side note that we'll bring this guy up again later, Sir Isaac Newton actually began to theorize his ideas of universal gravitation, and the whole apple hitting the ground story actually comes when Isaac Newton and his family are living in the countryside to avoid the plague of London, right? So now, also another big thing that goes down during his reign in 1666 is the Great Fire of London, when almost 30% of London and their homes were destroyed because of because of this massive fire that broke out, right? Now, a lot of people believe this is due to a myriad of reasons. There was a very long period of warm weather, drying out many of the homes that were built completely out of wood. There was no alleyways that separated the houses, so they were like row homes. And so when one finally caught on fire, the rest of them also went along with it. And then also unseasonable winds came in out of the east and blew into the fires and actually made the fires much, much harder to fight, right? Destroyed 13,200 homes and 87 churches under his reign. Catholics were immediately blamed for this, and Catholics also, one man was actually under torture, falsely hanged because he had to confess to doing it when he actually never even did it. So as we can see, even for a moment here as well, Charles is very heavily conflicted over his religion, right? He's heavily conflicted over his religion. He's conflicted over the people that he rules and their hatred of Catholics and other non-Protestants, right? And other types of Protestants. And then on top of all of this other stuff that he's got to deal with, he's now fighting the Anglo-Dutch Wars, right? The Anglo-Dutch Wars are England versus the Netherlands, which some of y'all are like, but wait a second, Mr. Terry, I thought you said that England supported the Dutch in most of the things that they actually accomplished. Like, for example, the 80 Years' War. Didn't Elizabeth support the Dutch in their rebellion against the Spanish Habsburgs under Philip II? And you know what, Kimberly Adams? That is a great question, and I know that you're just like, you had that one locked in there right there. Well, you are right that they did originally support them, but who screws up everything? Oliver Cromwell screws up everything, okay? With the Navigation Acts that Cromwell passed on the colonies, the 13 colonies, or not the 13 yet, but the colonies that England had established over in the New World, over in North America, when he forces those colonies to ship solely with English East India Company or English vessels, this angers the Dutch because the Dutch East India Company wanted, or West Indies Company at this point, but still, we're just going to call them the East India Company because that's colloquially what they're referred to as. The Dutch India Company, the East India Company, then has a massive portion of their market ripped off by Oliver Cromwell, leading to these wars, right? Now Oliver Cromwell's dead, but Charles is still fighting these wars, right? Because he has to actually have the navigation still up because it's an act of parliament, right? And to try and prevent some of these wars from getting out of hand, in the Third Anglo-Dutch War, he calls his cousin. His cousin is Louis XIV of France, right? Louis XIV is a young man in the 1660s. He's actually close to, he died in 1715 at the age of 72, and in the 1660s, he then would have actually been closer to, let me think about that, the Third Anglo-Dutch War, which took place in 1672, and that means that 1672, so 1715 minus 1672 equals 43. If you use 72 minus 43. Louis XIV was 29 when this went down, right? So 29 years old, and he was the cousin of Charles II. Some of you are like, why didn't we talk about the English Civil War first? Well, that's a great question. I don't really know. I probably definitely could have talked about this first, but I didn't want to. So the big thing about it, though, is France is going to aid England during the Third Anglo-Dutch War and is going to successfully help them win, but this alliance comes with provisions, right? Louis XIV and his aggressive absolutism is going to tell Charles, you owe me, all right? You owe me a lot of stuff. And the thing you're going to owe me is, first of all, what is the Stuarts' biggest gripe with Parliament? Always cash, right? Always cash. So Louis enticed Charles by signing the alliance saying, look, big fella, I got more money than I know what to do with. I will give you a royal allowance, as in I will give you money every single month so you can live this fabulous lifestyle that you're obsessed with, all these women, all this tennis, all these parties that you have in your royal court all the time. This is Louis talking to Charles, right? Because Charles, much like his cousin Louis, loved to throw balls, loved to throw masquerade parties, loved to have all this hedonistic behavior at these parties and things like that. And a royal allowance to Charles is what entices him to sign this alliance with Louis. So Louis says, I'll pay you every month, okay? You can have all these balls, you can have all this stuff that you want to do, but you have to ease the tension against the Catholics. You have to convert to Catholicism publicly, and you have to start easing all these restrictions on Catholics that exist in England, right? So because remember, what has always been the biggest beef with England from Catholic countries is their hatred of other Catholics, right? Now, the Declaration of Indulgence is an act that Charles tries to pass through Parliament. He attempts to pass the Declaration of Indulgence through Parliament, which would have been the toleration of Catholics and other Protestants. But the Parliament immediately struck this thing down, okay? They withdrew this and then formed a new act called the Test Act, right? And the Test Act was signed instead, and Charles was forced to sign it, right? And that barred anyone from Parliament or public service that was Catholic. Hence, testing them, it basically said you are going to be forced to go to Anglican Mass if you're going to be within the Parliament. You're going to take the Eucharist from the Anglican Church, and you are going to publicly display that you have no Catholic sentiments, right? So the Test Act was signed instead, which barred anybody from working in the public sphere that would have been Catholic, right? So instead of actually doing what Charles said he would do and easing the tensions on the Catholics, he ends up betraying not only his own faith that he secretly is, but also the alliance that he signed with Louis, right? Which is going to lead to further tensions between England and France. These conflicts, amongst many other things, leads to Charles having a very sordid life, emotionally very sordid. He marries a Portuguese Catholic princess early on, and their marriage does not go very well. And by the time the Great Fire of London happens in 1666, I know some of you are like, weren't you just talking about the 1670s a second ago? I'm just giving you an example of Charles's personality. After several failed pregnancies and things like that, Charles then falls into a pit of despair, and he starts relapsing onto his biggest addiction, women. Charles had over 12, so over a dozen illegitimate children, but he never had a single child with his wife, all right? So, and since she was Catholic, they didn't believe in divorce, so they never got divorced, never got it annulled, and he never had children with her. He had a bunch of illegitimate kids, but none of them can inherit the throne. So who is going to be the guy that inherits the throne when Charles finally dies in 1685? His brother, all right? His brother, James II, okay? James II, brother of Charles, is going to be brought in and assumes the throne after his hilarious death. We will talk about Charles's death in class when I see you guys again next week. It's very, very messed up and also really, really funny. And also really funny because it works into what the scientific revolution that we're going to be talking about soon, okay? Now, James II comes to power, okay? And Charles, right, we said was a secret Catholic his whole life. Charles converted officially to Catholicism, was baptized a Catholic, and took his very first Eucharist on his deathbed in 1685, all right? So just to give you some kind of semblance of what's going on here, okay? So in 1685, he takes his communion while he's dying, right? So, like, he never actually publicly converted to Catholicism like he agreed with Louis that he would, right? But James II, also the cousin of Louis, is a little bit more brandish, right? So James is an open Catholic, right? He is openly Catholic, and this is driving the Parliament nuts. The Parliament's like, oh my God, why do we have this happening right now? This Catholic is in power. Let's go try to find somebody to take the throne from him, right? So this one guy who claims to be the illegitimate son of Charles, I think he's the Duke of Marlborough or Duke of Montbury or Duke of M something, I don't know. But he claims, he's like, oh, my father is Charles, right? So I'm going to invade England. Well, James II's forces end up destroying that rebellion, drawing and quartering all the people that were involved in it, and stop it, right? And then also he starts appointing Catholics to high offices and positions in the army, which is a violation of the Test Act that Charles II had just signed, right? So this right here is James, and as you can tell, he's very fabulous, right? James II, though, is going to be doing a lot of crazy stuff. And Parliament is freaking out because they're like, oh no, we're about to have to return to Catholicism. Catholicism's going to come back. This is going to be Bloody Mary 2.0. This is going to be awful. Parliament, though, also gets very nervous when James finally has a son. All right, so James has a son in 1686, I believe. I think it's 1686. Who had very late in his life has a son, and he only had 2 surviving children, both girls. So Parliament was hoping that, oh, well, eventually when James dies, we'll be able to implant somebody else. But since he just had a son, and he had him baptized in the Catholic Church, the Parliament's like, okay, that's it. We got to bring somebody in. So they convince James II's daughter, Mary, who is an Anglican, and she is married to a Dutch Calvinist, William III, William of Orange, right? So this he is brought in to challenge James, right? So why is this a genius move by the Parliament? One, by implanting a Dutch leader on the throne of England, right, you can ease the tensions that were following those Anglo-Dutch wars. You can reseal this alliance with the Dutch, right? And then also this will give you help because you know for a fact if you're going to be getting rid of James, you're going to anger the French, right? So you're gaining an ally while you're pushing another one away, right? So they invite William of Orange, this guy right here, and the daughter of James II to come in and take over, right? And James II hears about this, and he's freaking out. Why is he so afraid of William of Orange? William of Orange is a pretty famous cat, right? William of Orange is actually the leader of the military forces against Louis during the War of Spanish Succession, right? So when the War of Spanish Succession happens, the Grand Alliance is led by none other than this guy, right? William of Orange. And so William of Orange is going to be responsible for actually tamping Louis down, and he's going to be the guy that becomes kind of the face of Europe for stopping France from taking over an entire side of the continent, right? So he's very, very famous, right? And also, people of Europe know who he is, right? And so when James tries to assemble an army to stop William of Orange from coming, no one comes to his aid. No one. James literally calls for an army to be assembled, and no one shows up. So what happens? James II is forced to run away from his daughter and his son-in-law like a scaredy cat, right? James runs away to France under Louis XIV and William, and Mary and William assume the throne. Hence the name of the university in Virginia, William and Mary, which was actually, I believe, chartered when William and Mary were actually on the throne, right? And so this right here is a picture of James literally fleeing to France in a rowboat. How embarrassing is that for the King of England to be running away from his daughter in this moment? And this moment is then going to be referred to as the Glorious Revolution, right? The Glorious Revolution. Why is it called so why is it so glorious? Because not a drop of blood was spilled, right? So in the Glorious Revolution, when William and Mary ascend to the throne, this is a massive moment, okay? Some argue that this moment is a part of the Enlightenment, all right? So Jot that down really quick. Some argue that this moment is a part of the Enlightenment, okay? New reforms are going to be coming down to the English government, right? So once this happens, you're going to start seeing all of these new ideas hit the English monarchy, right? They're going to split the power evenly between the king and the parliament. No more of this bickering. No more of this back and forth. Instead, the king and the parliament would rule jointly along with each other permanently, just like Elizabeth I did when she was alive, right? Parliament is going to be called for sure once every 3 years, without the interference of the king whatsoever, right? The English Bill of Rights is going to be ratified, which lays out the rights of the nobles, the gentry, and the common man within England, saying that the king cannot enforce taxes without just cause, that they can't imprison anyone, they can't quarter soldiers in your home, that you have the freedoms of basic human inalienable rights of life, liberty, and property, right? That's a really big deal. That ratification of the English Bill of Rights is huge, okay? Laws are also going to be prevented from being suspended by the crown, right? So literally the king is no longer allowed to suspend a law or do anything else. And the crown also could not interfere with a debate or a session of parliament. And we're going to show you the ceremonies and what parliament looks like now and how that's a product of the Glorious Revolution in class, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just jump back and pause it if you want, okay? Now, in this heated moment, the second that William and Mary come to power, one of the most famous Enlightenment thinkers releases his book, right? This is why many people believe that the Glorious Revolution is a part of the Enlightenment. And what the Enlightenment was a massive trend forward of political thought, political genius, political reform-minded individuals writing down their ideas. You've got John Locke. Thomas Hobbes is considered a part of the Enlightenment. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Baron de Montesquieu, Voltaire, my personal favorite. So Adam Smith, these major Enlightenment thinkers are actually garnering their ideas about an appropriate government in response to absolutism, okay? So, John Locke is going to issue his first book, the Second Treatise of Civil Government, during the Glorious Revolution. And in this, he outlines what he believes to be the basic, inalienable, natural rights of every man. Every man is endowed with 3 simple rights: liberty, the pursuit of property, and life, right? Life, liberty, property. Those are the natural rights that every man actually holds in his essence. And these rights and the ideas of John Locke will be the outline of the Declaration of Independence going forward into the American Revolution. So the Enlightenment is a major movement that is a reaction to the absolutist era, right? And under a tyrant, John Locke wrote that the people have the natural right to rebel, right? So we're going to stop right there, and we're going to talk about the waves and the ripples and the crazy effect that these moments send through all of European history, and we're going to talk about how that's going to relate to the Enlightenment, and we're going to track out our next unit, and then we're also going to review for your test. So I'll see you guys then. Y'all have a good one.